Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Dan Hiscock, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Warrant Officer Class 1, Lance Kieran. This evening we are honoured to acknowledge Lieutenant General Simon Stewart, Chief of Army, Brigadier Natasha Ludwig, Head of Corps, Royal Australian Corps of Transport, Brigadier Tim Hanna, Representative, Colonel Commandant, Royal Australian Corps of Transport, and the accompanying delegation who are in attendance this evening to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the formation of the Royal Australian Corps of Transport. We also warmly welcome one recruit training unit from the Royal Australian Air Force Base in Wagga Wagga. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Service Clubs Association, and we welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during events to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. I now invite you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read just one of the stories behind those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Francis Lawrence Smith. Francis Smith was born on the 29th of May, 1890 in Muswellbrook, New South Wales. Known as Frank, he was the eldest of four sons born to Lawrence Andrew Smith, a butcher, and his wife Bridget. Frank received his education at Muswellbrook Convent School before taking a local position as a telegraph messenger. He later moved to Sydney, where he worked as a clerk in the Postal Service and volunteered in the Army Service Corps as well as the Signal Corps of the local militia. When the First World War broke out in August 1914, Frank Smith was among the first to enlist, joining the newly formed Australian Imperial Force. In his previous experience, Smith was assigned to the 1st Divisional Train with the rank of Sergeant. After a short period of training in Australia, he embarked from Adelaide on the 22nd of October 1914 on the troop ship Hymettus. After several weeks at sea, Sergeant Smith arrived in Egypt, where Allied forces were training before landing on Gallipoli on the 25th of April. Smith and his comrades undertook essential supply duties in and around the front lines, replenishing stores of ammunition, petrol, water, and food by hand, by cart, and with the help of mules. Though the men of the 1st Divisional Train were not directly in the line of fire, their task was nonetheless dangerous, with constant exposure to shelling and sniping from enemy lines. Their work continued through the August offensive, after which operations on the peninsula descended into a stalemate. In September, Smith was transferred away from Gallipoli and was made the acting company sergeant major in November 1915. A month later, he joined the Western Frontier Force, which was operating against the Senussi in Egypt. Before the year was out, Smith was recognised with a mention in dispatches before being promoted to company sergeant major in 1916. After the campaign on Gallipoli had been abandoned, Smith and the rest of his unit continued their training in Egypt while awaiting deployment to the Western Front. In March 1916, he was promoted to Officer Class 1 before sailing for France in early April. He was awarded the Military Medal for his conduct on Gallipoli and was commissioned as a lieutenant in August 1916. After seeing out a cold and difficult winter at the front, Smith and his men continued supporting Allied operations while German forces began making a strategic withdrawal to the Hindenburg Line. Over the coming months, they were involved in assisting during key battles around Lagnicourt and Bullecourt before moving to the Ypres region in Belgium, where Allied forces were attempting to break through enemy lines. There, Smith and his men were predominantly engaged in transport work. During this period, Smith distinguished himself on 3 occasions, halting the transport convoys and assisting his men to repair the roads to allow Allied convoys to proceed. He later received a second mention in dispatches and the Military Cross. In early 1918, Smith had a short period of leave in England. He rejoined his unit in March 1918 in the midst of the German Spring Offensive as enemy forces launched a series of strong attacks designed to break through the Allied front. Smith and his men were mostly stationed around Stralsund and Mertern, working in transportation supply during the desperate fighting to halt the enemy's advance. On the 30th of June 1918, Smith was resting at the division's camp when enemy aircraft attacked, dropping several bombs. Smith was badly hit and was quickly transported to a nearby casualty clearing station with deep wounds to his left thigh and knee. Little could be done for him. He died the following day. One of his comrades wrote to his mother, "He was so severely wounded that he passed away at about 8 a.m. on the 1st of July. He was conscious when taken away, and his last request to me was to write to you. His condition was so serious that the priest was sent for at once, and he remained with him to the end. Frank was to us a brother, immensely popular with officers, NCOs and the men, brave and fearless, modest to an extreme, and every inch a soldier. Trust that God in his goodness and mercy will comfort you in your dark hours, and the knowledge that Frank died as a soldier, doing his duty to his country." Lieutenant Frank Smith was 28 years old. His name is listed on the honour roll on my right amongst 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Francis Lawrence Smith, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and sounding of the last post.
They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Wonderful party, praise and arms. Wonderful party, shoulder arms.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Wonderful party, in 1, 2. Wonderful party, quick, right.
We'll leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozier or in the low scrub of Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments. Well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.